Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, an inspired conversation space between Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner on the journey of motherhood through the common thread of parenting, relationship, and sexuality as a path to consciousness.
We keep our conversations honest, our experiences real, and our philosophies exploratory. We believe that in order to raise incredible humans, we first have to raise ourselves. We know that in order to rock the family, you've got to nourish the mother. If you are here, you care about paving a path of conscious and intentional motherhood, connected with yourself and your gifts, and also illuminating your children in theirs so we may raise more whole humans who can impact this world in a more humane way.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively, head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper. And for all live-streamed pre-release podcasts and all our free content, head over to our free Facebook group, Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. We are Julie Tenner and Bridget Wood, and we are so grateful you're here.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today's podcast is how do we roll with lockdowns? Because if you're in Melbourne, we've just gone in lockdown 6.0, or we're on Sydney's lockdown. There's lockdowns that seem to spontaneously arise within 24 hours, and certainly has been a lived experience for those of our community listeners that are not in Australia. So we just thought we'll take this opportunity, since we're in the trenches, to really look at what do we do here? What does a lived experience look like? How do we help ourselves and our children through this with as much compassion and sanity as is possible?
Yes, love it. And also I know a lot of people in the Northern Hemisphere who are listening who perhaps are seeing a lot of the commentary around this Delta variant and what's going on down here, and thinking, yeah, we could be going into that again when we come out of summer. So we felt like this was a relevant conversation wherever you find yourselves in the world, because whether you're living it or expecting to live it again, building our resilience and our perspective around this is paramount. How we do it with, as Julie said, a level of sanity and compassion.
Because who would have thought this is our reality? Like, you could never have predicted this.
No.
And here in Melbourne, we were talking about coming out of restrictions because we'd gone into one lockdown 5.0, we'd come out of it and we had 0 cases. And then 24 hours later, boom, we're back in lockdown 6.0. No, and you have no idea it's coming. Like 0, we were donut day, and now hardcore lockdown, which for us in Melbourne means don't leave your house outside of 5 reasons. 5-kilometre radius is all you can travel to. No one in your house, no public gatherings outside.
Yeah, it's
intense.
Yeah.
Children are home, at school, from school.
Yeah. So depending on where you are in your life, like whether you are, a working mother, whether you are stay at home, whether, for other people in the society, whether you're a student or, I don't know, elderly, I mean, how it affects people is so different across this cross-section of society. And it also affects people so differently based on class, based on socioeconomic status, based on so many factors. And once again, it widens the gap between those who have and those who have not. But specifically speaking, for this podcast, we're going to be talking about for us as mothers, because that's who we're talking to. And there's a level of anxiety for mothers for a myriad of reasons, for the quality of our children's education if they've come out of school, for our capacity to meet our own needs, because suddenly there is kids at home and we're trying to fit work around that, and we're trying to run home and feed our kids and shield them somewhat from the anxiety of the outer world that's coursing through our own bodies often. We are trying to uphold and create connection in a relationship that can sometimes feel pretty monotonous without the excitement of being able to see people outside the relationship, or have things to look forward to that spice up the relationship and make it diverse. Because as we know, like, when we're so familiar in an environment or in a dynamic with someone, it can breed complacency. So we've also got that going on at the same time. So there's lots and lots of factors that are compounding why lockdown can feel hard. Then you also add relationship difficulties and how you're in that, space in the face of relationship challenge or challenge with a particular child. Like, I mean, basically it's like, you're really in the fire of whatever it is you're going through, and you don't really, particularly based on your perceptions, if you feel like you have no way out of that, then it elevates your nervous system, your capacity to respond gets less, and then you keep the cycle going. So 100%. How we resource ourselves here is paramount, and it begins with the questions that we ask and the way that we find answers that get us beyond the pattern of thinking that we're in.
The only other challenge that I will just add, because I think it's really relevant for particularly the community of mums that I see around me, is also the financial strain that lockdowns specifically affect. So here at the moment, our government assistance is based on if you're GST registered, which means you earn over $75,000 in a year. But for most stay-at-home working mothers, they're earning under that. And yet what they earn contributes to the livelihood of their family. And all of a sudden lockdown happens. And particularly, I would say, I see particularly my single mother friends for whom fit in this category, it's catastrophic.
Gosh, because what you have no means to earn anything.
No means, because you're shut down.
For that.
Yeah, and there's no support for that, right? Because you're not considered a large enough business. So I also, and there's certainly partners who are losing jobs, people who, their work is put on hold because it's not part of the industries that can currently function. So I do think that there's also a huge financial weight, which, as we know, affects your sense of well-being and health and access across the board. So I also want to say I see that, and it's devastating, and I wish it were not.
And that also speaks to the fact that mothers are largely unseen in the pandemic, and even the reports that came out last year around the impact of it on women. This is just yet another example, right? Like the fact that the sole traders or self-employed people not registered for GST, which is a government tax, then you're on your own.
Right.
And you're on your own for an indefinite period of time, particularly in Melbourne and Sydney, where there's no end. There's no end in sight. We're told that we could be continually in and out of lockdowns for the next 6 to 12 months, and that one stat said that we could expect on average every 1 out of 3 to 4 days in lockdown for the rest of the year. So there's no sense, if we can just get past this week, or if we can just pay that bill, or if we can just... That's not a reality, because we don't then know when the next one's coming.
Yeah.
So, and as we know, one of the biggest stresses in a relationship is money.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the biggest reasons why couples fight.
I would love to just reflect back, just while we're on that point, Bridge, if you're willing, is last year when your husband lost his job and we were in COVID, and you were in this, this mental, physical, I don't know how to phrase it, this fight or flight in your body that you were having to navigate and regulate with the uncertainty of not having a salary coming in and having a dependent family. What advice could you offer, or wisdom, I'll say, what wisdom could you offer from your lived experience of that in COVID, in lockdown, to other families and mothers that find themselves needing to balance all of that in their bodies too?
Yeah. First of all, I would look at immediately what we need to do is, and obviously our brain and nervous system wants some sense of safety. So for me, what I immediately went to in my response was, how much savings have we got? Or where could we access money if we needed to, so that I felt like that would be a level of ease that I could meet. And so that's one way. And whether that's savings or something, or an investment that you could sell, or for some women or some families it's accessing your superannuation So you can access $10,000 of superannuation every year based on financial hardship. So that might be another avenue if you don't have immediate savings. And then the next level after a sense of baseline financial safety, the next level after that is working on self-worth and mental wellness, because one of the biggest things, particularly for men when they lose their job, is that loss of self-worth and that potential depression that can follow that, because so many men derive so much of their identity from their work, often more so than women. So for me, working through that with my husband, it was a lot of talking about the skills that he'd already built, talking about the contracts that he'd won, talking about the relationships that he'd built, so that it was constantly looking at not what he'd lost, but actually who he was and what he had, and that when the time was right, those were going to be employed again. And what could he do in the time being when he's out of work to work on those skills, to draw a sense of meaning, to have a focus, so that that he didn't just slide into watching sport all day or drinking or or whatever people might do when they're at that sense of desperation. So the first thing is, where can you shore yourself up or have some sense of safety, whether that's immediately through savings that you can access or superannuation, or family perhaps who might be able to support you or even say that they can, so that you feel in your body that you're not going to be destitute. And the second is building your self-worth. Where is your genius right now? Where would somebody come to you and ask for your help? Because that is your zone of service. And how can you practice being in that zone even when you're out of work, so that you can feed your own energy with that? And then that's also opening up to more opportunity when work can be available to engage in again.
How did you balance that, the fear, and parenting?
I put my focus, and it's probably a lot of why it was probably a blessing for me that my business also couldn't continue in that time. I put an enormous amount of my own energy and intention around regulating the nervous system of the family, essentially, by me feeling into where each person was at and finding appropriate outlets for that, so that it didn't end up becoming, big moments of family conflict as a way to resolve the energy and the tension. So that looked like meaningfully getting out for the day, meaningfully self-checking my own media consumption and my own pattern interrupting, where I might go into blame or even wanting to be saved, just noticing my own psyche and the kind of the ping pong effect that can happen when you're feeling out of control. Often it's someone to blame, or it's I want to escape, or I can't deal with this, and so I'll throw it somewhere, anywhere, or I'll numb it in food or media or TV or drinking or whatever that is. I actually made the comment the other day, because it felt momentous, that it was lockdown 6 that broke me, and I cracked a wine. I haven't drunk through any lockdowns until this last 6 months. I think it was such a surprise.
Oh, Bridgie, hats off to you, mate. I was drinking on number one.
It's not this noble thing. I'm just not a big drinker. It's just not my thing. But it was my thing this time. And so, yeah, I think for me it was really focusing on self-worth, focusing on resourcing myself. And I mean, parenting is a massive value for me, so I wasn't going to let it go. And I think, because my husband knows it's a massive value for me, that he wants to communicate in my values. So he also had to do his work to not bring the shit to them, basically.
Was that hard to navigate from a relationship perspective?
He was pretty crushed, but he came at it from the point of view of determination. I'm not going to let you down.
Oh.
That was really what, he said it through tears, but he's I'm not going to let you down. So yes, he was broken, but also underneath that was a lot of resolve.
That's the warrior, though, isn't it? The one who moved at the heart level for a cause greater than himself.
Yeah, it was actually a really beautiful time, as much as it was painful, because, you know, I think when the pandemic first broke and, you know, we had this conversation about, like, you know, what was this going to be? And we talked about, you know, our primary focus is the well-being of everybody in this family, and if we lose everything else, well, at least we have our well-being. So that, I think, kind of was what we centered ourselves on even before we knew that a job loss was on the horizon. And so that's what we came back to when the reality of that job loss was apparent. So he did spend a lot of his time doing projects, doing things that he derived a lot of meaning out of. So I still meant a lot of my work was in parenting, but then I also created business from that too. Like, I also saw that as a time where how can I serve from this place too? Because there must be other people in this position. So I think it's trying to get out of yourself as much as you can. Like, how can I rise beyond this place of my own pain and use it to be purposeful?
So we're just jumping in quickly and interrupting this juicy conversation to let you know of our two favourite offerings that we have on at the moment. So I, as Julie Tenner, have Queen School that is opening on August 10. It's 5 weeks as a feminine and relationship transformative container. And Bridget.
Yes, and I have the Reimagining Motherhood membership, which is your space to come to feel nourished and connected and celebrated as the woman and mother that you are. And we have the Mother Seasons series coming up beginning on the 5th of August. Find out at bridgetwood.life.
That requires a huge amount of emotional intelligence, though, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think it does. And I'm not saying it's easy, like, you know, the amount of,
like, I'm not saying that you are, but just reflecting on that part, right?
Yeah, huge, because it's all, I mean, and everybody will give you every reason why you're legitimate in your, you know, behaviors, even if they might not be particularly practical for you. Everybody will give you every reason why you can blame the government, or you can blame whoever's agenda, or this other person over here who's not doing the right thing, right? Like, we want to blame, like, the removalists, or the, right? Like, it's just easier to push it outside of ourselves and make someone else responsible. So I think, yeah, like, keep coming back to, what can I do? Like, what do I have control over? And how can I continue to focus on that and not everything that's beyond that? Because it's so easy to get down the rabbit hole of powerlessness, which is what it is when we're trying to agitate for something that's well beyond our realm of control and influence, and instead come back into what we can influence, what we can control, which is how we perceive it and the actions we take in response to that.
Can you break that down a little bit? Because I 100% agree with you. Or we can be, when we perceive we have no control, looking for where we do have control and then exerting that control in a deeply meaningful way is what I am saying. That's pretty hard too, I think, and harder still the more, is it left wing or right wing? I never know which one I'm supposed to say. Like, the more we hold alternative views.
Yes. Yeah, well, I mean, left wing and right wing are like liberal. It's not even liberal anymore, I wouldn't say. But
okay, so it's not even relevant to what I'm saying. Is that what you're saying?
You're more polarized. Maybe you mean the more polarized.
Okay, great. The more, well, I don't know. Even I was just thinking.
Oh, do you mean like more alternative views? Like, if you kind of, because you either I see two major narratives that we live under, right? So you've got the media supported government. Progressive left.
Yeah.
COVID is very real, very dangerous. We must be following every government recommendation, and that is our job to do. And then on that complete opposite, you have the whole thing is a scam. The vaccine is for depopulation purposes, right? So they're the two extremes.
Yeah.
And then you have existing in the middle, most people.
Yeah.
Right. Most people exist somewhere on a spectrum in that middle point.
Yeah.
But if you exist on either end of those extremes, then it's very, very easy to spend all of your time justifying your reasoning or your response and why everybody else should agree with that.
Yeah, but I think that's also really hard. But I was trying to bring it around. Like the more you sit there, the harder it is to do the thing you were just talking about. What was the thing?
Oh, like to check your perceptions and how you act from that. Yeah.
So I just wondered if you could talk through that just a little bit more.
Yeah. So I mean, the bigger the emotional reaction we have around something, the more emotional charge there is there, and the more polarized our thinking is, like the more black and white we are. So imagine those two extremes as a black perspective and a white perspective, or, you know, just the inverse of each other. And so they're very, very hard to hold. It's very hard to like hold two opposing viewpoints in your mind and still function. But ultimately, your capacity to do that and how well you can do that is how much self-mastery you have, right? So we're all going to, because we're human and we're emotional, we're all going to, like, you know, bounce around those. But ultimately, I love questioning, you know, like, wow, like if I hold this so strongly, what would it be like to hold the opposite view? And if I can't even entertain or understand why someone could hold the opposite view, then I'm pretty fundamentalist in my thinking. To not be able to take a walk around someone else's shoes and consider what it would be like to hold that view and what kind of life I might have lived to come to that, you know, belief, and have a level of compassion for the person who holds that belief, so that we can then see that we're actually two humans seeing the world really differently, but ultimately probably still want the same thing, which is freedom, health, some form of normal life. Like, we both want the same outcome. But it's important to ask then, if we can't see that and we can't see the different perspective, what am I currently getting out of holding so strongly onto the position that I have? What relationships have I built based on holding this belief as true? Who do I think I am if I'm this? And if I was the opposite, who could I be then? Am I worthy still?
Yeah, what impact would that have on my life, relationships, or career?
Yeah. Or am I so fixated on the identity that I've constructed right now that I couldn't possibly allow the unraveling of all of that and to exist in the sea of pairs of opposites, you know, and be willing to be a massive contradiction, which most humans are. We are massive contradictions. And the less we're willing to be called out on our contradictions, the more hardline we're holding on to the identity that we've created.
What do you mean by we're a massive contradictions? Because we're everything.
Because we're everything. Because every human being has every single trait and personality trait.
Yeah.
Because that is to be human. So
You're cutting in and out. Hang on.
And so do I?
Yeah, got you back.
Where am I a massive contradiction in my highest values? Because my identity is constructed based on my highest values. So if I have really high value on parenting well, then I will likely often will hide from my own awareness where I don't parent according to how I see myself as a parent. So,
and where I'm controlling, I can also equally go with the flow and not care about anything.
Yes. Yeah.
And where I'm super hard, I'll also be super lax in another.
Yep.
You're just saying you are everything. That is
everything.
A contradiction. Yeah.
Yes. And so, and people across your world already see you as everything. Like, they already do.
We see ourselves the least clearly.
Yeah, totally. And that's actually why everyone who has a reflection for you, even if you don't like to hear it, it's worth being curious about that reflection, because that reflection is also you.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, some of the deepest, most painful reflections I've been having to look at has been as an experience I've been going through lately around being called a whole bunch of names and things online, and looking at, okay, like, well, where am I like a toxic mother? Where can I find examples of what that looks like?
Yeah, fuck, it's brutal work
to
see yourself.
Not willing. It's brutal. Yeah. So when I can start to see that what they might be saying about me is true as well, like the person who, because, you know, we love to believe that we're all the great things that people call us, but can we also believe and consider that there might be all those other things that people might perceive in us as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Because we are a mess of contradictions, and we are both.
Yeah. It took me years to own self-righteous.
Yeah.
That one was like the ouchiest comment. And my sister used to go for that jugular every time. And it was like, the more she went for it, the more I pushed away and went, I am not like, I'm the most compassionate, humble person I know. And it took me years to have this awakening of being like, oh shit. Oh dear.
And then, like, you know, it's like the dominoes have fallen. Like, you just see it all the time.
But that's freedom too, right?
Totally. Because then you're not attached to being one way.
Right. And no longer having to create this like jarring, like this combat, because I'm not and you are, to the same degree of fighting each other.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden to go, yep, totally right. And now I get to actually choose my level of emotional intelligence around, okay, yeah, no, you're right. Am I ready to drop that and come back? Or am I, you know, like, we're on the same team here. Yep, I see that.
Yeah.
And I think that expands love, and therefore your ability to show up with wholeness in an infinitely expanded way. But I was listening to you then going, yeah, fuck yeah. I mean, you're doing the brutal work of it now. And I was reflecting, thinking, where's been my brutal work? Self-righteousness. It's been my most brutal.
And you'll usually see, and we'll perceive where our next work is when we see what most pisses us off in our kids, because they're also revealing the next stuck point of our own consciousness. You know, if we can't handle our child's rudeness, for example, and it's a really big trigger, well, where have we been rude? And in what ways has that been beneficial to us in our life? So that we can see that we're going to be both rude and polite, and they both exist as part of us for eternity, and they will both exist in our children for eternity. And so, do we shame our children for their rudeness, or do we help them self-reflect on why they might have been and how they can help see how effective communication might help them, but also understand rudeness and politeness both exist, and you will be both. How about you see the impact of this in this situation and the impact of that in that situation, so I can empower you to know where it is and know how that lands on other people, so that it's not this good, bad, right, wrong dichotomy that we grow up with, that we then go, fuck, like I almost feel schizophrenic in what I've taken on as programming, and now I'm meeting that in my children, and parenting feels hard.
Yeah, right. Right.
Yeah.
So I want to come back to when we're talking about how do we roll with lockdowns, and you had mentioned when you feel most out of control in terms of you don't perceive you have control over your own life, it's wise to also ask, where do you have control, and make that control meaningful.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So do you feel like giving examples or talking on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's looking at, because if we attach to all of the control we don't have and we want to escape where we are, then we're going to continually look for a release from the place we're at. So the biggest thing to look at is, okay, well, looking at what my own values are. So if we consider, if you're listening to this podcast, you likely have a high value on family. So, you know, what is the value to my family of us continually having our holiday postponed? You know, what do we have to bring into this unit now around fun or freedom or choice? You know, where can we explore or play with the very things that we thought the holiday was going to give us? And how can we be creative right now around that? When I think that my child is missing out on education, where are they gaining education? How is this opportunity that we're faced with now a chance to give them different life skills that they might not have built now, but they need at some point? And so how can this be a learning incubator as opposed to this learning void? I've actually forgotten the question, but what I'm looking
control, just looking for
control. Yeah. So where we have control. So you don't have control outside. But, I think also too, if you've existed with a fairly privileged life in a system which has largely been set up for you to coast through that system without much barrier, which is you and me and a lot of people who listen to this podcast, then we actually have some emotional work to do. We're kind of stunted because this is the first time for many of us where we have been so profoundly blocked by the outer world to be able to meet and self-actualize what we want.
Amen.
There are people who've been doing this shit since they were born.
Yeah.
And who have a level of resiliency to roll with, like the blocks and the controls and the no, and find their other ways and creative means around them. It's those of us who haven't had that so intensely that are then flailing. And so observing how you see people who are more adaptable to this and ask how they've become more adaptable is insightful in terms of seeing what skills we could be building on creative thinking, on recognizing how much we've actually given away our power, on expecting governments to do things for us or make our life easy or do the right thing or plan long term. One of the classic ones I find myself bitching about governments is their short-termism, and we wouldn't be here with like crap hospitals if we didn't have such short political cycles and lack of long-term visioning. Well, fuck, where am I not long-term visioning my life? Because I'm just pissed off. I'm just pissed off at the external reflection that is me. They're just me. They're just a reflection. So where am I short-term in my thinking, my visioning? Well, that's pretty humbling. Fuck. If we could just turn it back on ourselves for a second and then go, oh, right, okay, so if I mapped out what I want my next 5 years to be like, and I can see what I can do to achieve, that here now, how is this meaningful? And then we've gone, oh my God, I'm in lockdown. So I now have like less time that I'm spending being a mum taxi. So I've actually got more time where I could probably read a book, or I could teach my kid how to cook, or I could do other things that are going to empower me and empower them. So we actually both get to live in our values more meaningfully, as opposed to being pulled every which way that we get pulled when society is in full steam. So then actually that helps me bring myself back into control, because I've now got all of this time that's free from being organized by institutions and extracurriculars that I can now spend doing what I'd really love and what my kid would really love. And that feels like an opportunity. That actually feels like freedom. So that is what we can ask ourselves, is where I feel out of control, how can I control what's most meaningful to me right now? Because if what you wanted from a holiday is time with your family, exploring something, learning something new, being in a different environment, well, okay, how can you bring something new or something enticing or interesting or a different environment into your home now? Like my son and I are doing a deep dive. We're not doing school. We're doing a deep dive on Albert Einstein. It's fascinating what offshoots that creates, and we have the time to look at it. And we have the time to explore, and we have the time to go to different worlds and talk about what it would have been like, what it would have been like in Hiroshima in 1944 after the atomic bomb was dropped. And we got to that because we learned about how Albert Einstein was a pacifist and never wanted the atomic nuclear technology. So we're getting to do the things that we want to do together. It's just the form that's different. It's our attachment to the form of how we think it needs to be that is where we're suffering. So it's bringing it back. And this is like sometimes a daily practice, sometimes an hourly practice if we feel ourselves getting so triggered on a new lockdown extension or a new announcement. How do we bring it back into our kind of circle of control and influence?
I love it so much. I just feel like I could just sit here and listen to you. It's so inspiring.
Thanks. Yeah, so I mean, that would be my invitation. So look at like what you feel like you're missing or not going to be able to experience, and how can you find it in a different form? How can you create it where you are?
Amen.
Yeah. That brings us to the end of part 1 of our conversations on this particular topic around lockdown. And we've split it into 2 because it is a big conversation. We did have a lot to say. So if you want to keep hearing what we had to say, we really invite you to jump into our free Facebook group, which is Nourishing the Mother with Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner. You can access that by hopping onto our Instagram and checking out the profile link. It'll take you straight there to that group. And then you can keep on listening and watching us on video recording this one.
And Bridgie, what have you got on at the moment, and where can we connect with you?
Yeah, so I'd love to invite you, if you're feeling a sense of needing to connect to community at this time or just be really supported in your parenting and mothering journey, to hop into Reimagining Motherhood. It really is a space to rewrite how we do motherhood from a place of deep nourishment for who we are as well as who our children are. So we are doing the mother season. So all about the age and stages of your children, but also you and what comes up for you at this time and how you can grow in a really rich and beautiful way alongside your child. So check that out at bridgetwood.life. And what about you, Jules? You've got Queen School coming up.
Yes, so Queen School officially opens today and is only open for another 48 hours before we re-release again in February. So that's a 5-week relationship-focused, feminine-focused container. So you can find out more at julietenner.love.
Beautiful. Remember to nourish the woman to rock the family.
And we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
Thank you so much for listening. We literally couldn't do this without you. Please share this podcast with anyone you think it would be medicine for.
If you desire to integrate your learnings practically and supportively into your life, then head on over to bridgetwood.life or julietenner.love to go deeper.
And if you feel like giving back a little to this free content, please rate us on iTunes or Facebook, all of which helps the podcast reach more mamas who need this type of tonic for the soul.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.